Hey, Simon, welcome to
Jim.
2024.
It's what a wonderful year. I'm excited. I'm refreshed, and I'm ready to go. I'm
Yeah.
excited. This is going to be a really fun year for us and for the podcast.
Yeah, this will be our first full year.
It
So
will.
we have we've set a high bar, high expectations,
Yes,
and hopefully we'll meet them. I think we will. Um, we were talking the other day. You went to UCLA for college, right?
I did. Go Bruins. I've got for anyone watching the video stream, I've got my little Joe Bruin Funko right here. Because I was Joe Bruin. I was the mascot.
That's
I was the guy in the bear suit.
that's right. Were you like the
Yeah.
one at the basketball games, like dunking off of the trampolines and?
Well, see, that's the Chicago Bulls mascot is the one who's taken it to this next level of doing like these acrobatics and stuff. I was more like the mascot who would like do some like layups and stuff,
All right.
and then just like go find children in the audience because they love you. So that was really
These
that
are
that
t-shirts.
was the height of it.
Okay, well that's good.
But yeah,
Like
go Bruins.
so do you remember what factors went into your decision to go to USLA?
Oh.
Was it because they promised you the mascot position or?
That was a big part of it. No, there were so many factors in the decision. I moved here from New Zealand, and I'd heard of UCLA. In fact, I do remember the very first advertising touch point that I had was
Oh,
when I think I was 8 years old, and I was in New
eight.
Zealand. I know it was an out of home billboard by the airport in New Zealand, and it was an ad for an airline called Qantas. And they had it said U like YOU and then SEELA. And I was like, UCLA? I don't understand what that means. And my parents said, oh, well, it's a famous university in America. It's a play on that. And I was like, huh, UCLA. And that internalized with me. So even though it wasn't a UCLA
Wow.
touch point, try and measure that, the effect of
First
airlines advertising on university admissions.
first touch
But yeah, no,
attribution. Yeah.
lots of factors, you know. Even when I moved here, I was like, I don't know, there's so many options, so many great options. And, there's a lot of research, a lot of studying, a lot of asking people, a lot of going on forums, trying to figure out, is this a good school? Does it even have the majors or the degrees that I want? So, a million factors went into it.
Yeah. At least a million. You think if you had to maybe, I don't know, attribute your enrollment to various marketing channels, do you think, I
Oh,
mean, obviously the airport ad
yeah.
probably
The
gets the
airport when I was
bulk
8.
of the credit,
Yeah, that was significant.
Yeah.
No, it'll be very hard. I mean, certainly, the digital experience that I had was a significant one. But there was TV. I was watching football for the very first time, and
The
so
football
I was
team.
seeing these ads
Yeah.
on TV, going like, "Oh, okay, like UCLA, not just a cool name, but also like this great research institution. They've got all these really exciting things that they're doing for the world." So yeah, all of that impressed upon me, and ultimately led to the decision. Of course, finances, all these pieces.
Yeah, and of course, this is the Measure Up podcast, so we do
It
like to
is.
focus on measuring things. And when I hear about that story, and I've went to college myself, and I kind of think back to my experience of like what drove that decision, like trying to
Mm,
measure the various marketing touch points or the various decision nudges
right.
that were there. Like it seems impossible, right? Like
Well, it's such a long process. It is a logical decision, but it's also a highly emotional decision. And so it's one of those just I don't know. It's like buying a house. Like, what are all the factors? And you're like, I couldn't tell you. There's so many that went into it.
yeah, and like you said, it's such a long cycle. It's like
Yep.
people talk about like buying your house is the most expensive purchase you'll ever make in your life. It's like
Yeah.
maybe for
Try college.
some people might be
Yeah.
college might be the most
Yeah.
expensive. We're right up there, right? So like it's definitely a very, very considered purchase. And measuring all of these activities is very difficult. But
It
fortunately,
is.
Simon, we have the expert today
Oh, we do.
to help us and our listeners and viewers. Shout out to YouTube watchers.
Woo.
We have the expert help us understand the landscape of marketing measurement in the higher ed space. Very difficult space, but he's going to unpack a lot of this for us. So today we're joined by Josh Dodson. He is the founder and CEO of Honed Consulting, a consultancy that provides marketing measurement for higher education, including something near and dear to my heart, marketing mix modeling. He's a frequent presenter and keynote at conferences, many in the higher education space, like the Higher Ed Analytics Conference. He was vice president of innovation at Vision Point Marketing. He was a course instructor for higher ed experts. He was director of digital marketing for Bentley University and an associate vice president of digital marketing at Southern New Hampshire University, which is where our paths crossed about 7 years ago or so. He spent more time than anyone I know obsessing over marketing and analytics in the higher education space. And if I can not stumble through the rest of my words, I will now say, welcome to the show, Josh Dodson.
Woo! Thank you so much. It's fantastic to be here with you all. I'm thrilled to be able to talk with you today.
Absolutely. So we're going to get into this in a little bit, but as I'm reading through the intro there, my thought was you've been in the higher education space, and very, I didn't even mention all of them. You were at other universities as well. What is it about higher education that has captivated your curiosity?
Yeah. Well, I think for me, the idea of continuing to learn and being a lifelong learner myself, I have a couple of master's degrees and most of a doctorate finished. And, I just continue desire to learn and kind of grow myself, and also wanting that for other people. I know how much, getting degrees helped me in my career, learning new skills and things like that. And so the desire really for me is to help other people kind of find that path as well. Plenty of people grow up in less than ideal circumstances and situations. And I think education is one of the few roads that can help take people from whatever situation they're in and place them kind of on equal footing and allow them to grow and develop into, what they will become. And oftentimes that means moving, social, economic, variables and things like that. So for me, that's been a lot of the draw for higher education, is helping people to get there. I know that the sort of the big question of whether that is actually what's happening, in higher ed right now. But I like to think that it still is, at least in quite a few places.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that sounds way more admirable of a kind of a mission-driven objective than what I go for. I just, I just like to make the money, pay the bills, and learn a lot of cool new technologies and things. But I mean, yeah, that's way more admirable.
I really like to help folks find new types of cat food. That's my mission of why I do analytics. But no, that's also, and when you're talking at conferences in the academic space, I go, gosh, they must like fires, because I remember giving presentations in college and going as an undergrad to I presented at the Stanford Psychology Symposium, and it was just grueling, the rigor that I had to apply to the analysis that I was putting together for the proposal for the presentation, and just knowing the academic rigor that is required when you're presenting in these environments. It's really, you're like, I like to hit home runs. You're like, well, let's go try and hit them in this ballpark that's got 600 foot outfield walls at really, really low altitude. Anyway, on with the show.
All kinds of analogies today.
Indeed.
Yeah. So the main theme for today's episode is marketing measurement in the higher education space. But before we dive into that and talk about a couple of really meaty topics, I want to give you a chance to give a brief introduction to yourself and Hone Consulting. Talk a little bit about how you got to where you are and the work that you're doing with Honed.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So Honed Consulting launched last year, 2023. And I had sort of taken a break from any of the consulting work for a little while. And as I was kind of, I guess, in my downtime, starting to explore, figure out some of the new things that are available, some of the newer technologies, I learned that especially a lot of the newer open source technologies that have come out in the past few years, really only the past 5 years or less, a lot of these. And so learning these new tools, for example, Lightweight and Robin and some of the others that, Meta and there's a bunch of different frameworks out there that can be used. So I was exploring this and started talking with a client, and they were interested in doing a little bit more, kind of learning, figuring out what's working with their marketing. And I said, well, this is a little bit different. I've done a lot of predictive modeling and things like that in the past, and this is using a similar approach. It's kind of going old school, but I wanted to bring in some of the newer features and capabilities. And so we tried it out, and it sort of grew from there. I've been able to bring on a number of clients in that both the higher ed as well as the higher ed adjacent space since then. But we focus exclusively really on marketing measurement, specifically, primarily marketing mix modeling. But we do some additional things too, like causal inference, geolift studies, things like that. But that's kind of where we are now, and really looking forward to 2024 and anticipating quite a bit of growth in this space.
Yeah, I mean, you're hitting all of my favorite buzzwords, so I'm going to be having a fun conversation. I can tell.
Nice, love it. Yeah, it's a really interesting space net right now. I mean, there's a lot of change that's been happening, and I think a lot of folks maybe have seen some of the highlights of things that have been going on in higher ed, sort of, what's been happening even over the past few weeks with the various college presidents and the controversies. There's always some kind of controversy, but it's a really interesting time because we have these new challenges that we're faced with, trying to remedy those.
Well, can we expand on that a little? Like, when you're thinking about because when I think about marketing measurement challenges, obviously I know that there's a lot of different unique elements in different industries, but we were talking earlier about like this incredibly long cycle and all these factors. What do you see as the major challenges that you face uniquely in the higher ed measurement space?
Yeah, so I think there are a few things that are, if not unique to higher ed, at least sets it apart a little bit in terms of the type of product that we're marketing. It's a degree usually, and trying to convince people that they need a degree, need to come to this institution and get this specific degree. I mean, there are a number of decisions along that path, and kind of looking at it at the higher ed sort of space. The challenge really is to, as much as possible, capture data on each of the various touch points. To your point, Simon, the consideration cycle for higher ed, can be as long as 2 years in some cases. It might be much shorter depending on the program or the institution that you're working with. A lot of online programs might have a shorter consideration cycle. But yeah, 2 years, up to 2 years, that's a long time. I think even my oldest son, he's 16 and junior in high school, and already getting all kinds of mailings from various schools across the country. And it's amazing because I think back to, when I was even just considering going to college, it wasn't quite to the extreme that he's been getting all of these letters and stuff so early.
Well, yeah, and there's the efforts from the colleges to reach out to juniors, right? And that's kind of like the known marketing cycle. They know they need to reach out to them sooner and earlier and get in top of mind for them. But then there's even, it goes beyond that, right? It goes to branding, right? To Simon's point, like UCLA, he became aware when he was 8 years old, and that you can't tell me that there's not something about that didn't stick in your mind that somehow, even if a little bit, influenced you partly, right? Yeah. That's just like one example. I'm sure a lot of people have similar.
I think name ID is certainly pre the consideration phase here, but there's something I think as I'm hearing this, I'm like, okay, there's something here. I listen to a lot of political statistics podcasts, like the 538 podcast, where they talk about like name ID, and I'm like, okay, this is kind of like political measurement in that you have to pulse both the sentiment of society at a given moment in time, as well as individual propensity for certain things. And then obviously this is a different type of investment decision, but you can make the case that a vote is one of the most important things you can possibly do in your life. And so, it is a very highly considered thing for a lot of folks, which hey, apparently all the TV shows are saying now we're in a presidential cycle. I'm like, we've been in a presidential cycle for 3 years at this point. This is the tail end of it, but that means we've been going on for 3 years of marketing already. It's a very highly considered cycle and very hard to measure, just like this.
Yeah, yeah, and branding, right? Like you said, like name recognition, like Harvard, MIT, Stanford, like that's decades and centuries in some cases of marketing, of branding that's happened that puts them where they're at. So there's so much complexity and to try and like tease out and say like, oh, you spent this much in AdWords, this much. What did it get you? It's like, well,
right.
There's a lot to unpack.
We'll find out in 2 years.
Yeah. So, but kind of getting back to sort of what sets, higher ed, what's different about higher ed than direct to consumer e-commerce or B2B or SaaS or something like that? Like what are the particular challenges that higher ed faces? I know you mentioned the trust issues we've seen in the news with presidents either being let go or stepping down. One thing you mentioned to us in the prep call was, and I love this phrase, the enrollment cliff. I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So the enrollment cliff is something in higher ed that has been talked about for a few years now. But essentially, if you think back to 2008 and the financial crisis back then, it makes sense that a lot of people decided, they might not want to have as many children, or maybe hold off and have children a little bit later. And so the birth rates started to drop since then. And, fast forward 16 years, that's where we are today. And my 16-year-old son being recruited for college. And so if there are a lot fewer people kind of his age and younger that are coming out of high school, that really limits the options in terms of allowing colleges to recruit, to get more students and so forth. It increases a lot of the competition, and so that enrollment cliff is really a big deal. And as I mentioned, the competition, of course, but also it's required a lot of colleges to even reconsider what they're offering at all. What is the product that they're offering, and start to think about it more from the perspective of, what do they want to do? What kinds of topics do they want to learn about? What's going to help them in the job world, things like that. So they're having to change as a result of all of this. They're having to change what they teach. They're having to change the way that they're approaching marketing in general, because not only do they have a greater competition with that younger kind of just coming out of high school pool, but also they had to start really looking at a new audience, which is the adult student market. Schools like SNHU, where I was at, where I met Jim, at the time, the schools, SNHU was growing so rapidly. It wasn't yet the largest online nonprofit institution in the nation, but it was almost at that time, and it was growing. And a big part of that is because they knew to look for a different audience. They knew to bring in new techniques of marketing measurement and different approaches. And right now, I would say many institutions, the vast majority, well over 90%, haven't even started taking steps to really get to that place, aside from putting programs online as a result of the pandemic. But so many of them really are kind of not sure exactly what to do, because they're already starting to see some of those declines in enrollment.
The thing I love about this conversation so far is that it shines a big, broad light on more than what we're used to thinking about or talking about, right? We're always like, oh, Google Analytics and this report, I'm measuring my website visitors and how many people fill out my contact form. And like, as we kind of take a step back and think about like, what are all of the things that are influencing what I'm seeing in this report, right? And like the questions that your stakeholders are asking you, like, why are enrollments down? Why are, visits to our contact us page down? Why aren't people filling out our visit our campus, lead generation form, whatever? It's because your total addressable market is shrinking because something that happened 16 years ago, completely out of your control. But like, you have to be aware of all of the other contextual variables that could be making your Google Analytics report go down and to the right instead of up and to the right. Like it just kind of shows you that like you really need to have a broader perspective and understand the business, which I'm all for pushing that.
So what are those main avenues for folks that are being used for advertising or just, awareness in general at this moment in time that's driving folks to consider higher ed?
Sure. So I think a lot of the higher ed institutions are have borrowed from the e-commerce playbook a little bit. I would say the vast majority is attributed mostly accurately to Google Ads, driving a lot of the paid side of things. But I would say, I've worked with hundreds of schools and looked at hundreds of different, analytics accounts and seeing the vast majority of the traffic to the website and the vast majority of the sources for the leads that come in tend to be more of the organic sources. People are going to Google, they're typing in something, they're trying to, learn a little bit more. The organic sources really played a huge part in that, 70% more or more for most of them, usually well more than that. And it's then trying to figure out the different paid channels that they're trying, what levers kind of just within the paid channels can they pull. And those tend to be, as I mentioned, the Google Ads tends to be a big one. Facebook for a long time was a big component, a big part of the spend. I would say there's still often a big portion of the budget that's kind of reserved for print still. A lot of print, sending out, catalogs, view books, we call them in the space, but sending out these different marketing materials. And also there's a very heavy reliance at some institutions, especially the ones that have grown to be rather large. There's a heavier reliance on that personal customer experience, that having that phone call, talking to that person, and then allowing that conversation and experience to sort of integrate as part of the drip campaign, kind of with all of the other marketing that they're receiving in emails and so forth. So
it's interesting. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
It's interesting in that mix that you didn't. I don't believe you noted CTV, or just TV more broadly. And I put that out there because I, like most folks, I think in America, don't watch that much TV, but I do watch live sports. And when I watch live sports, I'm often watching obviously pros, but I love college sports. I love college basketball. I love college football. And I always like those. I just get inundated with university ads during those periods. And I go, this is probably actually really high quality inventory. I'm watching a very related sporting event. And the fact that you're tying into academia makes a ton of sense. That seems to me like maybe one of the strongest avenues for that institutional regard, right? Because this is part of the challenge too. Is not just like, are you aware of this university? It's if you go there and you tell someone I went to this school, are they going to be like, what? What is this, a clown college of sorts? It becomes this sort of, it's an interesting balance of like, it's sort of like, I forget what it was. You know what it is? In Utah, I was told this, that, cause I saw a Domo ad by the, out of home Domo billboard by the freeway. And I was like, why is Domo advertising on the freeway in Utah? And what I was told by my friend out there was that the reason they advertised it there is because, and this is, what he shared with me is because the wives of the husbands who are the engineers at Domo want to be proud of the fact that their husband works at a company that everybody knows. And I was like, okay, what a bizarre and also like 1950s kind of like housewife mindset attitude. But at the same time, one of those sort of like especially for younger students, like, will my parents be proud of me for going to this institution? And I think there's a lot of that in terms of how do you build up that sentiment and think about the marketing of just that component of not just name ID, but regard. What are those factors, by the way? Like, what are you looking at when you're thinking about building up that awareness? Like, what are the key metrics?
Building up better awareness. Yeah. So I think there are a few factors to look at, and some of the pieces that I want to kind of touch on a few of the things you just mentioned.
Please, yes.
So sports, for example, that does tend to be a factor, and sometimes it can be a very large factor, sometimes a small factor. I would say it's one of those components where I would encourage each institution to do their own analysis, because I've worked with a client, for example, where we incorporated some of even the sports trend analysis, the trend data from Google Trends, for example, as one of the variables in a marketing mix model to try to understand, the contribution of sports, or at least the interest in sports over time for that specific institution.
Yeah.
So,
or if you're in Ohio State or a Georgia or a Michigan, that is, how did they do in football this season? How are they doing in basketball? Like, that has to have some weight, right? Like, and that's got to be so hard too, though, to incorporate.
It's like a chunky middle, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because like at the top, when you're like, I don't care how Harvard did in football.
Right.
It's Harvard.
Yeah. It's gonna, like you said, Josh, it's gonna be different for each specific institution, right? If it's a Big Ten sports school versus an Ivy League school versus a school that I went to, which no one has ever heard of, it's much different considerations.
Yeah, definitely. And it's important, I think, to find a way to represent that in the analysis and as part of the data set that you're looking at, if possible. And I think, also to Simon's point earlier, it reminded me of so many institutions that I've worked with that have had some version of this, where a trustee member really, really loves, the fact that there's this billboard on the way to work, and whether or not the billboard produces any students is an entirely different question. But the trustee member loves it, and so because of that, they'll put the billboard there. It'll always be there because of the trustee member. And so I think there's definitely a lot of the sort of you might think of as old school politics almost at play within the marketing too. And I think being able to look at the data points and to be able to see, especially with an approach like marketing mix modeling, where you can actually differentiate, kind of pull the pieces apart to understand what's going into it, And at the end of the day, one thing I love about marketing mix modeling, and Jim, I'd love to get your thoughts on this too, is that with not all of the clients that I've worked with, but often they can do more with less of a budget. And because of that, I always recommend, that extra budget, if you want, you can use that as an experimental budget, right? So take that, start experimenting with the leftover funds, and then we'll incorporate that into the analysis next year. But being able to experiment with some of those new channels and kind of see, maybe this is a little bit more effective than that trustee's billboard, by his house. It's something I think that's worth considering.
Yeah. Or, we can keep the billboard, but let's not fool ourselves into what we're getting from that money.
Right.
What we're getting for that money is that trustee's happiness.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Or, for better or worse, donor recognition, right? Because I think what we're all circling around here is university marketing is complicated inherently because there are multiple different outcomes that you want to achieve with it. And one of those is enrollment. Yes, of course, the university has to stay alive. But equally as important, probably, I know UCLA thinks it is, because that's all they contact me about, is how much money can you give us?
Yes.
And my response was, I gave you a lot already. Because I paid to go to school. But no, it is one of those things, though, where the value of that kind of advertising, I don't think necessarily has that direct alignment. But I guess it's how do you balance that, and how do you think about the relationship between sentiment, name ID, unaided awareness with the donor pool as well as the enrollment? Yeah,
you're exactly right, Simon. I think that it is easy to forget about the donor aspect of things. Interestingly enough, in a lot of higher ed institutions, marketing is still under advancement, kind of that donor side of the house. And so for a lot of folks, that they're already kind of steeped in that world a little bit,
right?
Thinking about some of those things. But it is important, and I would argue, doing separate analyses of each kind of part of that is beneficial and possible. We've been able to get some really good returns on donations as well as on the enrollment side, but on the advancement side, getting better returns on donations when you can actually put out a test and see what, which version of this works better.
Yeah, that feels like a much more like straightforward, cut and dry. Like we sent out this email, version A, version B, which one got more donations, right? Like a lot easier on that side than on the enrollment side for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm wondering. Oh, go ahead, Simon.
No, you go.
Yeah,
my brain's swirling,
I know,
I'm just going to go in multiple directions simultaneously.
Yeah, I'm same here. But like the thing that keeps this coming to my mind here is like we've been talking a little bit about marketing mix modeling in the higher education space, and I'm wondering if there's been pushback on your side. Have you seen clients or other institutions be like, I don't know, like we have this pixel on our site and Google Analytics gives us this, data-driven attribution thing. Has there been pushback against more of a probabilistic methodology versus their, what they've been used to for the past 10 years or so?
I would say, for me at least, with all of the conversations that I've had around some of the newer approaches, I would say that there's two main things to consider. The first of which is they've been preached at, including by me, for years and years and years. Google Analytics, it will help you make sure you tag everything, add some pixels to your site, make sure that you've customized everything. And there's still some benefit to that. And I'm not saying, throw all of that away. So I think part of it is understanding like the place of it now. Google Analytics is no longer, sort of, at least I don't believe, should be considered the default attribution source, right? It's good for all kinds of other things. But in terms of just attribution, for a long time, it was considered the source of truth for many institutions. And I was part of that, encouraging more and more expertise in that area and trying to do more. Then GDPR came around and higher ed definitely paid attention because there have been, multiple institutions who have been sued for less. And, so things like that, they take very seriously Section 508 compliance, all of those types of things that they want to make sure that, privacy policies, all of that's updated on the website.
What is 508 compliance? I'm not familiar with that one.
Oh, that's like usability, screen readers, things like that, making sure that your website. And so, colleges get sued and they have to pay lots of money if they get caught and don't have an accessible site. So that's one aspect of it, is just sort of the continued message and belief that Google Analytics is the only answer, or at least the primary answer. And then the other side is, but this is really interesting and it looks cool. And I know something about AI that's happening right now. And so this sounds very promising. And I remember something from statistics class about maybe predicting values. So for a lot of people I've talked to, they've been really interested in it, but it's also been a bit of a challenge to break out of the old mindset and a kind of really tackle the marketing measurement challenge in a new way. Again, I preach a little bit of a both and now. Make sure like don't get rid of Google Analytics, still do those best practices, tag everything, all of that. It's still important. Do that. It's just this next side where we're going to take some of this data and actually match it back into the CRM or whichever system is being used and be able to do some predictive modeling around that. I think that frankly, the type of modeling that I'm doing today it didn't exist 5 years ago, right? So it's the kind of thing that with these new technologies, it's tricky because you have to accept the overall theory kind of approach of it, and then also trust the newer technologies as part of it.
Yeah. I think Robin's been around 3.5 years now when they first released that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm not sure about lightweight exactly, but I know they've all kind of, it's been in that range.
Yeah,
I want to say lightweight was like 2.5, maybe.
Yeah, and I'm probably getting the dates of the papers wrong, but I'm thinking for some reason 2016 is sticking out in my head as the year that Google put out the papers around Bayesian marketing mix modeling.
Mhm.
That's basically the theory behind how they were doing that with lightweight. But yeah, it's very, very, very new in our specific space of digital
Yeah.
analytics, marketing analytics. Yeah.
Or at least the democratized access to it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because I think for a long time there was the ideas have been swirling around for a long time, but the accessibility has been always been the gap there. And look, I think there's still a bit of an accessibility gap to most marketers and most folks who are going through this. And for better or worse, that's why we do see this default activity to lean into what Google has. And I mean, Jim and I both talk about being recovering MTA-aholics, where yeah, for years we preached the gospel, and now we're heretics.
I think we're going to have to start a drinking game where every time Simon says recovering multi-touch attribution aholics, we take a drink, because although that could be dangerous.
yes. Then we actually would have to become recovering alcoholics.
Many types of recovering aholics.
Indeed.
So I'm curious. I know, Josh, you've been doing a lot of marketing mix modeling in the higher ed space. Are there any trends or surprises in the data, things that you looked at and thought, wow, that's interesting, or maybe something that you see across multiple different institutions that kind of sticks out in your mind?
Sure. There are a few things that I've noticed. And actually, I'm gonna tie one of them back to the time when I was still working at SNHU all those years ago. One of the things at that time that I learned myself, just being around so many smart people and getting a chance to work with really brilliant individuals, is pulling in some data sources that you might not have thought about before. I know, Simon, earlier you mentioned, for example, TV commercials, right? And that's a big part. And so one of the things that, for example, I always recommend, include GRP data. As part of that marketing mix model, include what you can for the offline channels, the billboards, the posters, and the things like that, transit advertising. Include the data that's available, and usually you can get something. You can almost always get something. It might not be the best data, it might not be everything you want, but you can usually get something. And so for me, a learning is that really a lot of the offline channels have been much more effective than I had ever realized. In fact, some of the analyses I've done even recently found that traditional TV and cable TV both had a very significant impact on enrollment. And so things like CTV as part of your mix, also continuing to try traditional, continuing to try cable and some of those old school channels, maybe they have a place still. I think that's kind of been the biggest learning for me, is that just because so much can happen and is happening in the digital space, that doesn't mean we should ignore the offline space.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see too, you see the trends where more and more ad budget is going into digital, especially like CTV, going away from traditional TV into CTV, which I don't know. I haven't read anything recently around the levels of spend there, but at a certain point, you always hear about, well, traditional TV is so expensive, right? But at a certain point, it's the scale's going to tip, and at some point, probably in the not too near future, traditional TV might be really cheap comparative to CTV, right? So you always,
that begs the question of inventory availability at that point, right? Because the reason, I think part of the reason for the shift is also years ago when I was chatting with folks in the TV space, it was well, we're not ready for this. We think CTV is really novel. We just don't have the buying methodology or the infrastructure to support that type of buy. And now they're all making that move. And look, for what it's worth too, I think that CTV inventory is where the future is anyway, right? Because when I talk about watching TV, I'm not really watching TV. I'm watching it through YouTube TV. I'm watching it on Peacock. It's not actual real TV, even though that's the content that I get. I'm calling it the name of the device, not the actual methodology of the delivery. But that is interesting. And actually, as we're thinking about this and we're thinking about offline elements, experiments, right? You talked about experiments earlier. How do you frame experiments around for driving enrollment with universities, when often, obviously there's the online side of it, but often they are geo-specific. they will have, as a result, pre-contained audiences, right? Like people in California, much more likely to go to UCLA. Well, that's really hard to do an experiment. Like, are you doing a geo-based benchmark? How are you looking at these kind of things?
Yeah. That's a really important question, right? Because we have to figure out, and this really goes back to any good analysis. What I would just say, any good research that happens is, being very clear in defining what it is you're analyzing. That has to be the beginning starting point, because going into analysis, everyone's expecting different things,
Yeah.
and so kind of understanding, what it is we're trying to achieve and putting those parameters in place early on, because you're exactly right. You can't, it's impossible to measure absolutely everything. And to factor in, there's always going to be something that I sometimes refer to as a brand halo effect. There's always going to be that kind of ambiguous bit of stuff that's contributing to enrollment that you don't know about. So I would say what you can do, first of all, it's easier to kind of approach an analysis broadly, like let's say across the entire United States, if it is an online program, right?
Of course. Yes.
Definitely a lot easier. But when you start to look at some of the regional institutions, there's one client in particular that I'm thinking of at the moment that's done some really interesting targeting practices. And again, going back to the old school, keep tagging your campaigns appropriately, keep doing that, because the fact that they had tagged it so granularly allowed me to go more granular in the analysis and actually differentiate that, for example, the military audience was a hidden audience for them that they could really do a lot more with. And for example, maybe IP targeting of a certain, we'll say, hospital for RN, to BSN students, things like that. If the data's there, you can glean some of these insights a little bit better. And I always recommend, at least at first, approaching it with trying to include as much as you can initially, and then of course, narrow the data set down to what's really important. But yeah, that's, I think that's kind of how I would approach that. And it is tricky to, try to get all of the data points, but yeah, I think each situation is a little bit different.
I think you're sort of hitting the nail on the head with the reality of experiments and the fact that there's always going to be these variables that we can't control for, and we try and make our best bet on it. But this is why we have degrees of confidence and not necessarily just like I know for sure this is happening.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Well,
Jim, you look pensive.
Yeah.
I always look that way. It's
yes.
It comes with old age. There's so many things that we could go down and so many rabbit holes that we could talk about. Before we wrap up, Simon, do you have any other questions or anything that we're leaving out that we definitely want to cover?
Oh gosh, I mean, I feel like we could go on for a while. I guess, how about this? Like, one of the elements that we talked about earlier was the length of the cycle. And in the past, when I've done some work with higher institutions, we were very gung ho about this paid media feedback loop that we could have, where we were getting the Google ID, the Google Ads ID, the G-code, and then passing that back through into Google Ads. But we would always run into the deprecation cycle or the retention cycle limit, right? How do you look at that, given obviously there's a big focus here on using paid media, but sort of acknowledging that you're only ever going to get part of the story at this moment in time, even though that's such a powerful deterministic signal? Is that still important to you?
Yeah, I think it is important. I would say that for myself as a practitioner in this space for a long time, I would respond by saying that I've been genuinely surprised at how we can answer some of that using some of the newer tools, in terms of the tools being able to kind of pull apart and identify these different contributors. This happened. This ad went out. It had an immediate response, and it contributed to X number of students. I think some of the tools that can start to pull those pieces apart a little bit more, which have been really exciting. I think to dig into that space a little bit. But I would say that personally, I've been so impressed with the capabilities of the tools and frankly, how it solved some of those challenges of the unknown. The things like of the consideration cycle, the decay of the decay rate of an individual ad over time.
Yeah.
All of those are factors, and I think another piece of this that was really exciting to me, and I find very exciting, is that certain packages and different tools have really simplified the what you need to include, how you need to include it, and really leaning a lot on machine learning to do some of that work that would have been very manual, like calculating the what it would have been like, the counterfactual, what it would have been like if we hadn't done this test, for example. And so some of the tools, if they're able to really easily calculate that for you and do it with a high level of accuracy or an acceptable level of accuracy, because one thing that I always mention to my clients is that all models are wrong and some models are useful, right? That old quote. It's an important one. But I also share another quote that I always also share with my clients is, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, which I think is also very true, because being able to see some of the insights from these tools and these newer capabilities, I mean, I've been just amazed. I'm like, wow, I'm like a kid in a candy shop with my mouth open, like, wow, it actually generates this report for you, or I can do this type of analysis and figure this out a little bit easier. But I guess what I'm getting at is that I really love the way that the unknown is treated in some of these newer tools, because, as you mentioned earlier, the Bayesian approach, that's kind of the foundation of it, is having a place for the unknown in the analysis, right? And I think that's remains a very important part. But the fact that you can bring in things like yearly seasonality, bringing in variables like holidays, bringing in other variables that might be impacting what's going on, and being able to separate it out, I think it's very exciting. And I think it's one of those things, I feel like you really have to see it to fully get it and fully appreciate it. But at least for me, I just appreciate that the technology has advanced this far.
Yeah. And when you're talking about the tools, to be clear, I think you're referring to things like Meta's Robin or Google's Lightweight MMM, or even like PyMC marketing. Is that right? Yeah,
that's right. All of those tools are exactly the ones that I'm referring to. Even some of the Pandas, different packages, Python, R. You can do a lot with all of that. I mean, it's really amazing. You don't have to start from scratch with anything anymore.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. No, super interesting. And I think we have to leave this topic for another day. But where I always struggle, where I always struggle is with the reality of the signals that we're able to feed back into the ad platforms and because measurement is important, but the feedback loops, it's two sides of the measurement coin. But again, we'll leave that for another day. And Jim, I've got a 3 bodies of measurement thing. Maybe we'll dive into that sometime.
Ooh, wow.
I've been honing it for a few years, and I'd love to bring it to prime time. But anyway, yeah, good stuff.
So Josh, we do like to end the show with an incremental insight from our guest, something that that no one else knows, or that you think is especially important.
Here's where I hide my spare key. Yeah,
exactly. It's something that
I haven't paid taxes in 5 years. Sorry.
It's something that you think marketers and analysts listening or watching can get some extra information out of, something that they can take action after listening, or they can, a book or an article, or just some special bit of advice that you can offer to them that can help them in their day to day. Do you have something like that for us?
Yeah, I do, definitely. First of all, marketing mix modeling is, if you've not checked it out, you got to check it out. It's extremely valuable and can answer a lot of questions that other techniques really can't. That's the first piece, but the incremental insight, it comes from it, where I would say all of my marketing mix modeling clients that I've had over the past year, every single one of them have found that offline channels, out of home, specifically billboards and TV, have been much stronger influences on enrollments than they had ever realized, even beating Facebook. So I think that was
Take that, Zuckerberg.
Yeah. So that would be the big thing, is that I would say don't overlook your offline channels.
Excellent.
Absolutely. Well, when the world of measurement in the higher ed space, especially when it's associated with an out-of-home billboard outside of a trustee's house, gets you down, then it's time to measure up.